My name's Jack. I'm 47, live in Laconia, New Hampshire. Yeah, that lake town up north that's crawling with summer tourists and the occasional desperate real estate agent trying to flip a fixer-upper into a second home. I've lived here my whole life. I was the quiet one, the helper, the reliable brother, the son who never left the table before the dishes were done. And I don't say that like a badge of honor anymore, not after everything. You ever spend years thinking your place in the family was solid because you kept showing up? Birthdays, hospital visits, late-night calls to fix a busted heater or talk someone through a car problem. I did all that. I wasn't flashy, never needed to be thanked, just useful. Invisible in a dependable kind of way. That's what I thought I was to them. That maybe usefulness was love. But what if I told you the worst betrayal isn't loud or dramatic? It's subtle. It's being the only one not invited to your family's annual Thanksgiving dinner, the one you've attended for 24 straight years, hosted in the same old colonial house you helped put a new roof on. I found out by accident. My niece posted a group photo on Instagram with the caption, "So grateful for this crew." There they all were. Turkey in the background. Even my cousin Greg made it up from Philly, Greg, who once stole my dad's lawn mower and sold it. And me? I wasn't even a name they forgot to tag. That was the last domino. That was the moment I stopped mistaking grace for being a doormat. I didn't text. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg to be included. I just stopped. Stopped showing up. Stopped paying my parents' electric bill every winter like I'd done since Mom forgot how to budget. Stopped patching up my sister's leaky pipes. Stopped pretending that silence was love and that sacrifice was the same thing as being seen. But let me rewind, because the exclusion wasn't sudden. It started like rot behind drywall. You don't see it until the wall caves in. It was my mom's voice that started the shift, subtle things she'd say without realizing how sharp they landed. Like when I called to check in and she told me, "Oh, we just assumed you'd be busy. Not thanks for calling, not how are you, just that I was too busy for them." Or when I sent a few $100 to cover their oil delivery last winter and my brother, Dean, made a joke in the group text about how I always have to be the hero. That's the thing about being the reliable one. They start resenting you for it. Like your consistency becomes a mirror they don't want to look into. And let me tell you, when someone resents you for helping, that's not gratitude you're earning. That's quiet ammunition to save for later. So I kept showing up, kept contributing, because I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Families get messy, right? But then came the lake house. It was my grandfather's originally. Tired old thing on Lake Winnipesaukee, creaked like an old man's knees and smelled like damp wood in childhood summers. After he passed, the house fell to my parents, and they couldn't afford to maintain it. So who stepped in? Me. I paid for the new dock. I redid the plumbing. I fronted the bill to replace the septic system because heaven forbid we host another 4th of July with an overflowing outhouse. We all used it. Dean brought his kids up there every summer. My sister Lila hosted her 40th there. I barely touched the place, too busy working, too busy keeping everyone else's lives afloat. But when it came time to decide ownership, and they started talking about transferring the deed, guess who they didn't include in that conversation? Dean, Lila, and my parents made the decision during a family brunch I wasn't invited to. Found out through my nephew, who mentioned, "Uncle Dean's going to be fixing up his lake house." His lake house. That's when I started pulling back in a real way. Quietly. No announcement, no speech. Just recalibration. It was mid-November when I got the final gut punch. Cold, gray sky, wet leaves sticking to the windshield as I pulled into the Hannaford parking lot for groceries I didn't need. Just trying to kill the kind of loneliness you feel when you realize you're not anyone's first thought. I was scrolling through my phone in the parking lot, about to head inside, when I saw it, my cousin Melinda's story on Facebook. A boomerang video of my entire family around the big oak dining table at my parents' house, holding wine glasses and laughing, turkey in the background. The caption read, "Annual family dinner tradition, so thankful for nights like this." My stomach dropped. Annual. As in, the thing we did every single year potluck style. My green bean casserole always getting demolished even though they teased me about it. But this year, I got no text, no invite, not even a guilt trip to afterthought. I sat there, phone still in my hand, engine still running, and I swear time slowed down. Because that's when everything crystallized. They didn't forget me. They excluded me. On purpose. Strategically. Quietly. Like a stain they'd finally scrubbed out of the family photo. Now here's the twist that still punches me when I think about it. 3 days earlier, I'd Venmo'd my mom $250 to help cover groceries. For Thanksgiving, I'd written in the note. She heart reacted. No one corrected me. No one said, "Oh, we're doing something smaller this year." I was paying for a meal I wasn't even allowed to eat. That was the moment. That was the click of the lock inside me. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I just sat there in my truck, watching them laugh through a screen, and realized I had spent my whole life showing up for people who never once saved me a seat. So I turned off the ignition, put my phone face down on the passenger seat, and drove home. Not sad, not even angry, just done. 2 days after the non-dinner, I called the realtor. Her name was Susan, local woman with a firm handshake and a reputation for moving lake properties even in the dead of winter. I didn't tell anyone in the family. I didn't know them a warning. The house was still legally split 4 ways. Me, Dean, Lila, and our parents. But I was the only one who ever paid for the upkeep. So I had my records. Every invoice, every Venmo, every receipt for the new dock, the water heater, the snow removal contract. I sent it all to Susan's office and told her what I wanted. Sell my share. Cash buyers only. Quietly. She raised an eyebrow, probably used to divorces, but not family land severances like this, and asked if I was sure. I was. The twist? I already had a buyer. A guy I knew from high school, Rich Travers, had just come into money after selling his tech company. He'd been looking for a lakeside spot to host retreats. I floated the idea months ago, just joking over beers. Now I called him up and said, "You still want a slice of the lake?" 36 hours later, the offer came in. Here's the thing they didn't expect. I had kept records not because I was bitter, but because I'm methodical. I'm the guy who files his taxes in January and keeps a folder for appliance warranties. They laughed at that once. Called me Old Man Jack behind my back. Old Man Jack just cashed out his quarter of the lake house for more than Dean and Lila combined had ever put into it. They didn't even know the deal was closed until Susan called to schedule the appraisal. The phone call started that afternoon. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Let them read the contract. That night, I poured myself a bourbon, sat on my porch in the cold, and watched the stillness of winter begin to settle. Not a victory. Not a screw you. Just peace. Earned peace. The thing about pulling back from a toxic system is that the silence rings louder than any argument ever could. Once I sold my share of the lake house, the texts came like clockwork. Dean was the first. WTF, bro? You went behind our backs. Like we were in this together. Like I wasn't the one who fronted the bill for that damn roof when a nor'easter peeled half of it off. I didn't answer. Lila called a few hours later, her voice dripping with the kind of sugary concern people use when they're scared you're serious. "Jack, honey, we could have talked about it." No, we couldn't have. If we could have talked about anything, maybe someone would have told me about Thanksgiving. Maybe someone would have noticed I hadn't set foot in that lake house for 2 years while they played house on my dime. Mom finally reached out 2 days after the sale closed. Not to apologize, not to acknowledge what had happened, but to ask if I could still help with the winter heating oil, just until spring, she said, like it was some favor owed out of birthright. I stared at the text for a full 5 minutes before I typed. "I think Dean and Lila can cover that now. I'm stepping back." No response. Not a question. Not a follow-up. Just silence. It was in that silence I started noticing things I'd been ignoring for years. How I never really got birthday cards anymore. Not unless I reminded someone. How family group texts would go off for hours, and I'd scroll up to see that my name hadn't been mentioned once. How I'd only ever been asked to show up when there was a project, a payment, or a problem. I was never invited to rest with them, only to rescue them. You start to understand something bitter when you realize your worth was tied entirely to what you gave, not who you were. And when you stop giving, they treat it like betrayal, not boundary. So I made another decision. The monthly auto transfer I'd been sending to my parents' account? Gone. The emergency loan I gave Dean when he said he needed help covering his daughter's braces. Money I knew I'd never see again. I called it a gift in my heart and let it go, not for him, but for me. Because I was done keeping score in a game I wasn't even playing voluntarily. I started doing strange things, too. Little acts of freedom. I took Friday afternoons off and went to a diner I liked in Wolfboro, ordered a slice of blueberry pie and sat with no phone, just coffee and quiet. I bought myself a new mattress, the kind with adjustable settings, because I realized I'd been sleeping on hand-me-downs since I moved out of my parents' house. I started reading again, stretching in the mornings. Breathing like peace wasn't a luxury but a habit I could practice. People talk about choosing yourself like it's this empowering Instagram slogan. Let me tell you the truth, at first, it feels like grief, like failure, like giving up on something you were conditioned to keep chasing. But then it settles into your bones like warmth. Not loud, not flashy, just a quiet knowing you're finally on your own side. The first real fallout came 2 weeks after the lake house sale, not in the form of some apology or tearful realization, but a certified letter in the mail from a family attorney I'd never heard of. A formal notice requesting a conversation regarding shared family assets and perceived imbalance of decision-making. Translation? They were pissed. I read it at the kitchen table, coffee going cold in my hand. They wanted to review financial contributions and property claims, which, let me remind you, they'd never cared about when I was footing the bills. Now, with my name off the deed and my checkbook closed, suddenly everyone wanted to talk fairness. It wasn't just legal. It got personal. Lila sent a long email. Not a call, not a visit. An email carefully worded, probably edited a dozen times, filled with phrases like family cohesion and hurtful actions done without transparency. She ended it with, "I just wish we could have talked about this like adults." And here's what twisted my gut. I used to be the one begging for adult conversations. The one suggesting we put things on paper, set expectations, clarify boundaries. Every time, I got brushed off as the overthinker, the worrier, the guy who made a big deal out of everything. Now, because I finally made a decision they couldn't control, I was the one being called immature. Dean, predictably, skipped diplomacy. His text came in short bursts. "Real nice. You blindsided us. Mom's stressed out. Hope it was worth it." Was it worth it? Let me tell you something. There's a kind of peace in knowing you are no longer the emergency contact for people who only call you in emergencies. I slept better. Ate slower. Even my neighbors noticed I seemed lighter. And it wasn't revenge. It was relief. Real, deep, aching relief from the weight of being the unacknowledged backbone of a house that never offered shelter in return. And then came Christmas. It was Dean's year to host. Every other year we rotated between the three of us. Normally, I'd be there early, hauling and folding chairs, fixing the outlet in the living room that always sparked, wrapping the spare gifts for cousins who forgot their own kids' presents, because of course Uncle Jack always comes through. Not this time. I stayed home. I put on the Charlie Brown Christmas album, made cinnamon rolls from scratch, and didn't check my phone once. Around noon, it buzzed. A photo from Lila. The whole family in matching pajamas. Even my dad, who swore he'd never wear anything that didn't have a button. And right there, dead center on the couch, was my spot. Empty. A little corner of the couch, visibly unclaimed. Like a dent in the cushion still remembered the shape of someone who used to sit there. That was the first time I cried. Not from regret, but from the strange, aching beauty of being missed, even by a couch. I didn't respond to the lawyer's letter. At least not right away. I let it sit on the counter next to the basket of mail I usually ignore, grocery store flyers, insurance updates, coupons for oil changes I never use. But every time I passed it, it stared back like a dare. Part of me wanted to chuck it. The other part, the part that had spent decades being overlooked, decided to open a folder on my laptop instead. A folder labeled Family Contributions. Yeah, I kept records. Not because I planned to weaponize them. Just because I was tired of people rewriting history every time money came up. I had spreadsheets, tax returns, screenshots of bank transfers, even photos of receipts from that weekend. I bought all the lumber to rebuild the deck after Dean's kids broke 3 boards roughhousing. My favorite was the invoice from the HVAC repair I covered, the one they all conveniently forgot about until the heat started working again. So when the lawyer sent a second letter, this one with bolder font and more aggressive phrasing, I printed out a 27-page packet and mailed it right back. Not a word of commentary. No emotional appeal. Just numbers. Dates. Facts. 2 weeks of silence followed. Then, late one Friday, I got a call. Blocked number. Normally, I let those go to voicemail. But something told me to pick up. It was my father. He didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask why I'd stopped coming around. Just launched right in. Said I was tearing the family apart. Said Mom was crying more than usual. Said Dean was struggling financially and that a good son wouldn't abandon his brother when things got hard. And I just listened. Let him finish. Then I told him I was done being a good son, if that meant being an invisible one. That being useful wasn't the same as being loved. That I wasn't their workhorse anymore. He went quiet for a beat. Then he asked if I was really willing to walk away from the inheritance. That's when I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. A freeing one. I told him I'd already walked away the day I found out I wasn't even supposed to know about it. When I accidentally saw the will while helping them with paperwork last year and realized everything was going to Dean, the house, the savings, the land, with nothing to my name except some vague line about both sons being valued equally. I heard him exhale like he'd just been caught holding something heavy for too long. He didn't deny it. Didn't even try. He just said, it was complicated. It always is when people don't want to face what they've done. That night, I sat by my fireplace with a beer in one hand and a pen in the other. I wrote my own will. Nothing fancy. Just enough to put my affairs in order. I left what I had to a friend who once loaned me his truck in a blizzard without asking why I needed it. Because sometimes, the people who show up for you aren't family by blood, they're family by choice. It came on a Tuesday. Gray, rainy, the kind of New England afternoon where the air smells like wet bark and everything feels heavier than it is. I was making soup, actual soup, from scratch, something I hadn't done in years, when my phone buzzed across the counter. It was Mom. No voicemail. Just a text. Jack, I need to see you. Please. Just for a few minutes. It's about the house. For a while, I stared at it. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because part of me was surprised she'd used the word need. For most of my life, their needs weren't voiced. They were assumed, expected, wrapped in guilt, and given as a gift you were supposed to be grateful to carry. But this time she asked. And maybe that's why I went. I told myself I wouldn't go inside. I even parked on the street instead of the driveway. Stood out in the drizzle for a second too long before ringing the bell. She opened the door. Looked older. Smaller. Wore the same cardigan she'd had since I was a kid, the one with the missing button she never bothered to fix. And I realized how much time had passed. Not just in years, but in distance. In silence. She led me to the dining room, where everything looked exactly the same lace table runner, the same dish of stale peppermints, the same framed photo of Dean in his varsity jacket on the sideboard. No photo of me. There hadn't been for a long time. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said it plain. We're behind on the mortgage. I blinked. That was the emergency. Turns out, after I stopped paying the utilities, they restructured a loan. A high-interest, balloon-style deal that looked great for the first 6 months and then started bleeding them dry. Dean was supposed to help. He didn't. Lila promised to float them with a bonus she expected in December. It didn't come through. Now the bank wanted their money, and they were running out of places to hide. I waited. Let the moment stretch. She looked up. Her eyes weren't pleading. Exactly, more like resigned. Like she'd known this moment was coming and didn't have the strength to lie her way out of it. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words. Quiet. Fragile. But they didn't undo the years of silence. They didn't change the will. The exclusion. The expectation that I'd always be the one to patch, to pay, to fix. So I told her the truth. That I loved her, in the way a child loves the idea of what a parent could be. But I wasn't going to save them anymore. That the peace I'd found was too hard one to trade back for guilt. That I hoped she found help, but it wasn't going to be me. She nodded. Just once. Like she'd already known. As I stood up to leave, I saw something flicker across her face. Not anger. Not grief. Something closer to understanding. After I walked out of my parents' house that Tuesday, I thought I'd feel something bigger, a weight lifted, a surge of clarity, maybe even pride. But the truth was quieter. More hollow. The next few days passed in a kind of stillness. Not peaceful, not yet. More like the stillness after a storm, when everything's damp and quiet and smells like dirt and new beginnings. I didn't hear from them. Not Mom. Not Dean. Not Lila. Not even one of those awkward, just checking in texts that families send when they're too proud to apologize but too ashamed to let go completely. One morning in April, I bumped into an old friend from high school, Nate Parker. He used to play drums in a garage band that practiced 2 doors down from mine. We hadn't talked in years, just friendly nods if we passed at the gas station. But that day, he stopped me, said I looked good. Lighter. And I realized. I was. I told him about everything. Not all the details, not the will or the emails or the phone calls. Just the broad strokes. I stepped back from my family to save myself. His response surprised me. Took guts, man. Most people die waiting for an apology that never comes. We grabbed coffee that same day. Then did it again the next week. Then again. I found myself laughing. Like really laughing. The kind that echoes in your chest and doesn't feel like a performance. I didn't realize how long it had been. I also started seeing someone. That part came quietly, like everything else lately. Her name's Allison. Met her at the hardware store, of all places. I was comparing drill bits. She was buying weather stripping. We both reached for the same pack, chuckled, stepped back, and struck up a conversation about home repairs that turned into coffee, then dinner, then a walk that lasted until midnight. She asked about my family once. I told her the truth. Not the scandal. Not the ugly parts. Just this. I used to think they were the center of everything. Turns out, they were just the orbit I got stuck in. I left the gravity, finally. She didn't pry. Just nodded, touched my hand lightly, and said, I'm glad you did. There was a time I would have felt guilty about all this. About moving on, about choosing joy. But not now. Now I understood something no one ever told me growing up. Sometimes peace isn't what you gain. It's what you stop holding. A few weeks ago, I got a letter. Not a text, not an email. An actual letter, handwritten, postmarked from the old house. Mom's shaky cursive on the envelope. I almost didn't open it. Part of me feared some final guilt trip, some backhanded apology wrapped in flowery language. But it wasn't that. It was 3 sentences. We understand now. I'm sorry for how long it took. Take care of yourself. This isn't a revenge story. I don't wish my family harm. I don't fantasize about their regrets. I don't replay the Thanksgiving that didn't happen, or the couch cushion that remembered me when no one else did. I just don't live there anymore, not in that house, not in that role, not in that version of myself. I live here now, in a small house I bought with money they didn't know I saved, in a space filled with furniture I picked, books I love, and a dog I named Murphy who follows me from room to room like he's worried I'll vanish too.